A warm welcome to everybody on this seminar on patient-ventilator interaction to be presented by me, Dr. Ayush Agarwal, with my JR preceptor, Dr. Sujay Halkol Shankar, under the expert guidance of our faculty preceptors, Dr. Animesh J. sir and Dr. Upendra Beta sir. So let's start with introduction and importance of this topic. So we have a lung and chest wall unit, which is responsible for respiration, that is for breathing in air and breathing out air. In a normally breathing patient like us, we receive a neural input which initiates a breath, which maintains a breath, and then which terminates a breath. But in a mechanically ventilated patient, apart from this neural input, they also receive a ventilatory input, where the ventilator initiates a breath, maintains a breath, and terminates a breath, where sometimes it initiates on its own or other times it assists. So the patient-ventilator interaction in its essence is this interaction between the neural inputs and the ventilatory inputs which determine the breath. But patient-ventilator interaction is much more than that. It is a holistic interaction between various patient as well as ventilatory factors. Patient factors include the level of consciousness of the patient, whether he is sedated or agitated, presence of fever, pain, and anxiety, presence of comorbidities, the disease process for which the patient was intubated, and also the ventilatory circuit factors. These ventilatory circuit factors include not only the ventilator, but also the circuit and the artificial airway through which the patient is being ventilated. So these ventilatory factors include the mode of ventilation, the settings of ventilator, alarm settings, circuit tubings, and the artificial airway, which is usually either endotracheal tube or a tracheostomy tube. Now we have observed some changing trends in mechanical ventilation. In 1960s, when it was first introduced, the main aim was to sustain life. But gradually as we progressed, we aimed to maintain an adequate blood gas exchange and prevent atelectasis. With further research into ARDS, lung predictive strategies were developed. And now in 21st century, we aim to have an optimal patient ventilator synchrony, so as to reduce the it will confound these lung protective ventilation by itself inducing ventilator-induced lung injury or ventilator-induced diaphragmatic dysfunction. And it may also cause sleep fragmentation. So what are the consequences? As I said, it will lead to poor gas exchange and increased work of breathing. It may itself induce ventilator-induced diaphragmatic dysfunction and ventilator-induced lung injury, thus leading to increased duration of hospital stay and increased cost of healthcare. So now, after understanding what is patient-ventilator interaction and its importance, let's now move on to brush up basic facts about the physiology and basics of mechanical ventilation. So in a spontaneously breathing patient, there is a negative pressure ventilation. So what happens in a negative pressure ventilation? We have a brain in which there is brainstem. From brainstem, from the medulla, a neural inspiratory rhythm is generated, which travels down the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm. As a result of which, the diaphragm contracts, the intercostal muscles in the chest wall expands. This leads to a negative intrapleural pressure, which is transmitted to the alveoli. Thus, air moves from a higher pressure to the lower pressure, and thus inspiration occurs. What occurs during expiration is there is passive relaxation of the diaphragm and the chest wall, as a result of which the intrapleural pressure becomes positive, which is transmitted to the alveoli. Thus, the air moves from higher pressure to the lower pressure, and expiration occurs. In stark contrast to this, in a positive pressure ventilation by ventilator, first the ventilator increases the pressure inside the tubing. So there's a higher pressure outside compared to inside. Thus, air moves from higher pressure to lower pressure inside the lungs. This positive pressure is transmitted to the intrapleural space and subsequently leading to downward motion of the diaphragm and outward motion of the chest wall, which is visible as a chest rise in these patients. During expiration, the pressure in the circuit reduces. Thus, air moves from outer higher pressure to the lower pressure. With the movement of air, there's decrease in the intrapleural pressure, and the diaphragm moves up, and the chest wall, the chest rise, opposite of the chest rise occurs. So all these things and all the further things we'll be studying can be represented by what is known as equation of motion of the respiratory system, which is now central to this dynamics. So we all know that air has to move in, it has to inflate the lung in the chest wall, and then it has to move out. So it requires a particular amount of work which needs to be done. So the pressure required to do this work is what is known as P total. This P total involves the pressure to move the air through the conducting part, which is the airways, and then to inflate the lung. So come across the compressive and resistive forces of the lung and chest wall to inflate the alveoli. So this is what is known as trans-airway pressure, which is resistance into flow. So higher the resistance or higher the flow, higher will be the pressure. Similarly, transthoracic pressure is elastance into volume. Elastance is the stiffness of the lungs. So lower the compliance, higher the elastance, and volume is the tidal volume or the change in volume which is occurring with each breath. So transthoracic pressure is elastance into volume. Now what happens is the total pressure required to accomplish this work is contributed by both patient and ventilator. And this is this dynamic synchrony and the relative proportion of contribution between two, that is the sense of patient-ventilator interaction. And this is what gives rise to asynchronies. Sometimes P patient is higher and pressure contributed by ventilator is less. Sometimes P ventilator is less and P patient is high. So we aim to optimize synchrony between these two pressures. Now coming on to how to assess this interaction. So as the name implies, it is a patient-ventilator interaction. So there have to be some patient parameters as well as some ventilatory parameters. Patient parameters include examining the patient, auscultating the chest, looking for the signs which examining the circuits and the endotracheal tube, etc. Secondly, is looking at the patient's vitals, which include the respiratory rate, the saturation, the hemodynamic parameters like BP and pulse rate, and some invasive tests like arterial blood gas analysis, which provide insight into oxygenation and ventilation. Another thing is ventilatory parameters. Ventilatory parameters include both the parameters as well as the ventilatory waveforms. There are some executive modalities as well, like electrical activity of the diaphragm and the esophageal pressure monitoring. And now automated algorithms using artificial intelligence have also come into play. So if we need to understand ventilator management and understand the asynchronies, first of all, we need to understand the waveform graphics. So what are the waveform graphics in mechanical ventilation? There are broadly two waveforms, scalars and the loops. Scalars are the graphs of these variables against time. So we have a pressure scalar in which we plot pressure against time, volume scalar, Vt, tidal volume against time, and flow scalar, V naught against time. And other things are the loops. Loops are the graph of one variable against other without time. So we have pressure volume loop where pressure is plotted against volume. We have flow volume loop in which flow V naught is plotted against volume Vt. Now coming on to variables. Now one breath is composed of inspiration plus expiration. So we have inspiration, we have expiration. Now there are some variables which determine the phases of breath. For example, there's a trigger variable. Trigger variable triggers inspiration. That is, this determines when inspiration will begin. It can be every breath in a mechanically ventilated patient can either be patient triggered or machine triggered. How does machine trigger a breath? Machine triggered breath is dependent on a time variable. For example, if we set a respiratory rate of, for example, 20, so machine will trigger breath every 3 seconds. This is known as time triggering. After a time of every 3 seconds, machine will trigger breath. Similarly, there can be patient triggered breath. How does a patient trigger breath? By either changes in pressure or flow. For example, when the pressure in inspiratory circuit decreases below a limited threshold, the ventilator will assist a breath. Similarly, when there's a positive flow towards the patient of a limited threshold, of a particular threshold, it will deliver breath. So trigger variables are usually time, pressure, or flow, depending on what triggers the breath. Another thing is during inspiration, we have what is called as a target variable, which is also called limit variable. A target variable is what regulates the gas flow during inspiration. We have two basic modes of ventilation. In volume control mode, flow is the target. For example, we have to achieve a particular flow of 2 liters per minute, neither more nor less. And a pressure control ventilation, when we have to achieve a pressure of a particular duration, neither more nor less. So this is the target variable. And then we have a cycling variable. Cycling variable cycles from inspiration to expiration. That is, causes inspiration to end. In a volume control mode, it is usually volume or time. That is, after a particular amount of volume is delivered, it will cycle into expiration. In a pressure control mode, it is usually time, as we'll see later. And in a pressure support mode of ventilation, it is a flow. That after a particular flow is achieved, it will cycle into expiration. Similarly, we can see it on a pressure scalar that the trigger variable determines the inspiration. Now, during the flow, the target variable, which is also called as limit variable, it regulates the gas flow during inspiration, and then cycling variable cycles from inspiration to expiration. So as I talked, there are two broad modes of ventilation: pressure controlled ventilation and volume controlled ventilation. Pressure controlled, as the name implies, in this, the clinician controls the pressure or sets a pressure to be delivered to each breath. For example, we can see in this PCV mode, the pressure in each breath is constant, though the volume may change. So in the volume control mode, the volume is constant. For example, with each breath, the volume and the flow is constant, though the pressures may change. Pressure control includes PCV, pressure controlled ventilation, pressure controlled synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation, and PSV, pressure support. Similarly, volume control modes include VCV as well as VCSIMV. So now let's delve into each of these different modes of ventilation. So this is the VCV mode, volume control ventilation. Now, whenever you see this ventilatory output screen, I want you to focus on four things. What are the four things? One is the ventilatory waveforms. Second is the ventilatory parameters you set. Third is the ventilatory parameters being delivered to the patient. And fourth are the alarm settings, these alarm settings, which are very important. So first we'll start with ventilatory waveforms. We have scalars and we have loops. This is the pressure against time, pressure scalar, volume against time, volume scalar, and flow against time, flow scalar. This is the pressure volume loop and V naught against V, flow volume loop. So we can see this is a volume control mode of ventilation. So we have got a set tidal volume and a slet flow pattern. In this case, it is a decelerating flow pattern. So what we set is, first, we set a tidal volume, which in this case is 360 ml. We set a respiratory rate, and we set inspiratory to expiratory ratio. For example, inspiratory time, that if we are delivering 16 breaths per minute, and we have around 3 something seconds per breath, 1.2 seconds will be inspiratory time, and rest will be expiratory time. Apart from it, we set a positive and expiratory pressure, P. We set a sensitivity. So sensitivity is for the trigger variable. Sensitivity here is 2 liters per minute. So it is a flow triggered in this case. Most of the modern ventilators have flow triggered because flow triggered is more physiological compared to pressure triggered. Now, what this means is, when the in this flow scalar, the positive deflection means that the air is moving from the ventilator towards the patient. That is, it is inspiration. A negative deflection means that the air is moving from the patient towards the ventilator. That is, it is expiration. So when there is a movement of air from the patient, ventilator towards the patient, and there's a positive deflection, when there's a deflection of at least 2 liters per minute, then the ventilator senses that the patient is trying to take breath, and it will deliver a breath. So it will deliver breath here. Now we can see that what we are setting. So one thing more, we set a FiO2 of 30% or whatever to target the saturation. Okay, so whenever you're analyzing scalars, you need to analyze all these three scalars in tandem. So we have got these three lines for the sake of simplicity. We have got this pressure scalar, we have got this flow scalar, and we have got this tidal volume scalar. So at this point of time, inspiration begins. I want you to understand this because on this basis, we'll understand the asynchronies in a much better way. At this point of time, the flow is positive and inspiration is beginning. At this point, the flow is constant. So at this point, when the inspiration becomes, we can see that the tidal volume is rising. That means the patient is intaking air, and the pressure has also started rising. Now, at the end of inspiration, what we see is that there is no flow, that there is pause in the flow. This is what is known as end inspiratory pause. At this point, you can see that the tidal volume is not generating, or is not changing. That is, it is neither going out nor in. And at this point of time, the pressure has reduced and come to a level which is known as P plateau. And then at this point of time, it has cycled into expiration. That is, the expiratory flow is now occurring, the negative flow. The tidal volume has started decreasing, and we have come to what is known as positive and expiratory pressure that we have set. Again, inspiration occurs, and then end inspiratory pause, and then expiration. So, why are these pressures important? From the base till the highest point, this is what is known as peak. From the base till this the end inspiratory pause, this is known as P plat. And from the base till this is what is known as positive end expiratory pressure. This is important because this P peak is reflective of the trans airway pressure as well as the driving pressures in the lung. Trans airway pressure, as we saw in the equation of motion slide, is the pressure required to move air through the conducting system, and it is reflected by P peak minus P plat, while the driving pressure is the pressure which is required to move air through the exchange part, that is through the alveoli. So the driving pressure is P plat minus P. This is important in calculation of static and dynamic compliance. Static compliance is the tidal volume which we are giving divided by this driving pressure, P plat minus P, and dynamic compliance is the tidal volume divided by P peak minus P, that is combination of transfer pressure and the driving pressure. Now coming on to the next mode, which is the PCV mode. First, we'll analyze the waveforms, then the ventilatory parameters. So in PCV mode, as we can see, the pressure is constant. It is being controlled, while the volume is changing. Sometimes the time is high, and sometimes the flow may be larger, sometimes the flow may be less. So since we control pressure, we set the ventilatory parameters of pressure. So we set PI, which is known as peak inspiratory pressure. This is the maximum inspiratory pressure which is allowed during inspiration. Then we set PEEP. Similar to VCV, we set a respiratory rate and FiO2. In this, very important thing is we set a TI by T total. TI by T total, why? Because this PCV mode is time cycled. Time cycled is that at this point of time, inspiration begins. So inspiration begins, the pressure rises to the PI. As we can see, the flow is positive and the patient intakes a flow. And at this point, after a particular inspiratory time we have set, it cycles into expiration. Whether the patient receives adequate volume or not, it doesn't matter. It matters on the PI and the time, how much the patient is getting. Then again, the trigger, this trigger is the trigger variable, that a particular 3 liter per minute flow is required to for the ventilator to assess the breath. Now coming on to the last, the PSP mode or the CPAP mode. Again, this is a pressure controlled ventilation. So the pressures are equal while the flow is changing, the tidal volume is changing. What we set in this, we set a PSV, the pressure support. We set PEEP. Important thing, again, we set FiO2. Two things are important. One, that apart from trigger sensitivity, we also set what is known as expiratory sensitivity. Why? Because this is a flow cycle. What does flow cycle mean? Flow cycle means that, for example, here, inspiration begins and the flow begins. Then the flow reaches a peak flow. This is a pressure scalar, this is the volume scalar, this is the flow scalar. So it reaches a particular flow. When the flow reaches 25% of this peak flow, then it cycles into expiration. So this is what is the meaning of expiratory sensitivity. So if I increase the expiratory sensitivity to, for example, 30%, it will cycle earlier. If I change the expiratory sensitivity, for example, 5%, then 5% will come somewhat here. So it will cycle late. Okay. So flow cycling is important. And again, the set parameters are very different from what the parameters are being delivered to the patient. So this is a table summarizing various things we have seen. So again, just summarizing, in a volume control mode, we know that the target and the controlling variable is volume, which is the flow. The trigger can be the ventilator. If the ventilator triggers, it is time triggered. If the patient triggers, it is usually pressure or flow. Usually it is flow nowadays. And cycling is volume or time. In case we have inspiratory pause, we have time cycling. Others, we have volume cycling, which is actually a product of flow and time. Then in pressure control, the target and the limiting variable, which is same, is the pressure. Trigger can be patient or ventilator, and cycling is time. And in pressure support ventilation, the trigger is patient, the target variable is pressure, and the cycling is flow. Okay. Now we'll proceed ahead. Things not to forget. As I said, the fourth thing, setting alarms is really important, and setting appropriate alarms is also very important. So in this pneumo vent, we have got pressure limits. You must set appropriate pressure limits. In this case, the pressure limits probably are not set right. Similarly, in PCV mode, you should set a pressure alarm setting of minimum minute ventilation. So if the minute ventilation goes down a particular value, the alarm may ring. In volume control mode, the higher pressure limits are quite important. Second, set appropriate trigger sensitivity. And third, set backup ventilation. In case you have a PSP mode, if an intubated patient is on PSP mode, don't forget to set up a backup ventilation. Many ventilators don't allow you to set a PSP mode unless you have set up backup ventilation now. Okay. Now, after assessing the interaction and understanding waveforms, we'll now proceed to troubleshooting the common problems we see in the wards. So we have this first case. This is the case of a 50-year-old gentleman, known case of diabetes, hypertension, COPD, presenting with fever and cough. On X-ray, there is pneumonia. He was intubated in view of worsening respiratory failure. Now he was maintaining well. But at night, the relatives come to the first MGR in the ward saying that the patient is restless, and the patient notices the following. So this is the ventilator. We need to see again four things: the alarm, the ventilatory waveform, the parameters which we have set, and the parameters which are being delivered to the patient. So we see the resident sees that the high pressure alarm is ringing. Then he sees the parameter. He sees that this is P peak and the alarm being set is 45 and the P peaks are 46, which are more than what is usually normal. He sees the waveforms and he sees, oh, there's spiking pressures. Usually most of the breaths are being delivered normally, but in this particular instant, the pressure went very high. As a result, there was premature cycling. Premature cycling, that prematurely the breath was terminated and inspiration was forced into expiration to save the lungs from higher pressures, which may damage the lung. So what should he do next? So can anybody say what he should do next? Okay, calculating the airway resistance. These bits, exactly. So let's first understand, whenever you face any situation like this, okay, so whenever you face any situation like this in any of the modes, you must know that the causes of high PP can be either due to increased airway resistance or due to increased elastance of the lung. So increased airway resistance is manifested by increased P peak minus P plat, peak infiltratory pressure minus P plat, and it can occur due to first that you have HME filters. There may be clogging of the HME filters due to secretions or blood. Then there may be kinking of the tube, as we can see here. When the tube enters, the patient may be biting the tube within his teeth. Then there may be tube migration, whether the tube has gone too much inside into a single lung or migrated from its position. Then in the patient's airway, there may be bronchospasms and there may be secretions of blood clots in the tube circuit or the airway. Another thing is increased elastance, in which the P plat will be higher. This condition occurs in, for example, ARDS, when this pneumonia patient is going into ARDS. When he has developed pneumothorax, for example, in a ventilated patient, the first CM inserts a central venous line, and as a iatrogenic complication, pneumothorax has happened. Another thing can be dynamic hyperinflation, when air is being trapped inside, and after a particular amount of time, this is manifesting as P plat. And another thing can be these secretions causing a lobar collapse due to mucus plug. For example, in this case, we see that there's a left lung collapse due to mucus plug. So in cases of COPD and secretions, we can have both increased airway resistance and elastance. For example, due to bronchospasm, we'll have increased airway resistance. But if we don't optimize the ventilatory settings, the COPD patients in ICU may go on to dynamic hyperinflation and increase in P plat. Similarly, secretions, when present, may increase airway resistance, but if they're causing collapse, they may also lead to increased P plat. So in this case, what he should do is, first of all, it would be really nice to examine the patient. Examine the patient, like looking for the HME filter clogging, looking for the secretions in the tube, and auscultating chest, whether he can see any rhonchi or crackles, etc. He should then suction and nebulize the patient. Then calculate the P plat and trans-airway pressure. These two things may occur in tandem. In this case, since he's spontaneously breathing, calculating P plat is difficult. But this is a general thing which you should follow in the wards while if you come across this scenario. Then check for patient ventilator dysynchrony. This is also very important. Sometimes the mode where the patient is may not be appropriate for him. And also check for auto peak. If suspecting any problem in the ventilator, it might be prudent to disconnect the patient from the ventilator and manually evaluate resistance of the patient's lung chest wall unit with an embu bag. Okay. Also do the POCUS of lungs and obtain the chest radiograph to look for pneumothorax, the collapse, etc. And optimize alarm settings. Maybe you have an obese patient in which the chest wall is very heavy. So the P peaks may be higher. So in that case, you have to optimize alarm settings according to that. So doing these things should troubleshoot most of the things. So in this case, there were secretions in the tube. The sixer sectioned the patient, and as you can see, the P peak is lower. The alarm settings are gone. The ventilation is well within the alarm settings, and there is synchrony. Now coming on to case 2. The first MGR after this Intelling previous case was discussing other cases with his seniors. So they were analyzing the ventilator waveforms of one of the patients when they come across this. So this is the volume control mode of ventilation in which you have pressure scaler, flow scaler, and volume scaler. What you see here is that the patient inspires, then expires, but at the end of inspiration, there's abrupt decrease in the volume, and the patient inspires again. That is what is reflective of air leak through the circuit. When the amount being inspired doesn't match the amount being expired, because the expired volume is leaking through somewhere else also. Similarly, I said, look at the ventilatory parameters as well. So VTI is 794, VT is only 412. So there is a gross mismatch between inspired and expired air as well. So this is what is air leak. Now, what are the common causes of air leak? We have this trachea, we have got esophagus, and in this case, we have the artificial tube as tracheostomy tube with the cuff inflated around it. So there may be leak around this endotracheal tube cuff, which may be due to insufficient insufflation of the cuff, or there may be rupture of the cuff, which is causing air to leak. Another thing can be that due to tracheal necrosis, there's formation of tracheoesophageal fistula. So the air is leaking through the esophagus through the mouth outside. Another thing can be outside. There could be disconnection of the tubings, or during connection of nebulizers. Commonly, it happens that there's some disconnection or loose connections which cause air leak. And how can we measure this? Insufficient inflation of the cuff. Whenever you intubate a patient, it's always good that you you connect this cuff monitor which we have in our wards and C2 ICU and connect it to the pilot balloon so that you can see that adequate cuff pressure has been there. Adequate cuff pressure is around 20 to 30 centimeters of water, and it is reflected as a green area in the cuff monitor. So the cuff pressure should be neither too high or neither too low. Another technique is minimum leak technique, which is also there to ensure adequate cuff inflation. So in this case, auscultate the patient, especially in the neck region, to check if there's air leak, check the inflation of the pilot balloon, check the ventilatory circuits if there's any disconnections, and also check if closed suction is on. In many patients, we have got a closed container suction device, and that may be responsible for the leakage of air. So in this case, we had leakage through the around the endotracheal tube cuff, and after correction of that, the air leak resolved. So coming on to the next case, case 3, a patient with type 1 respiratory failure was admitted to D226. So he was shifted from emergency on a portable ventilator, and when on receiving in D2 ward, our OT technician connects it to one of our own ventilators. Now the resident optimizes and sets the ventilatory parameters, but to his utter dismay, the saturation of the patient is only 82%, despite his maximum efforts. So what we can see is the resident has set in on 100% FiO2, but the saturation is still still less. So we can see the alarm. The alarm of low FiO2 is triggering because the FiO2 being delivered is only 53. Okay. Why is alarm triggering? So this is interesting thing that the alarm settings being set is 66 to 54%. So even if it was 80%, maybe the alarm would have triggered. But if it was between 66 and 54, the alarm would not have maybe triggered because the alarm settings were not optimized in this case. So alarm setting optimization is quite important, so that appropriate alarms ring at an appropriate time. So in case you have a suspected ventilator issue, check the tubings in connection of ventilator. In this case, we found that the connection of oxygen tubing to the wall socket was loose, as a result of which adequate FiO2 was not being delivered. Ensure that the compressor is on. If the compressor is not on, the set variable will be, for example, FiO2 of 30%, but the FiO2 being delivered will be 100% because the compressor is not on, so no air is being mixed. In case of any doubt you have, if you're suspecting ventilatory problem, disconnect the ventilator and test the ventilator with test lung. You've got these test lungs in the intubation trolley, so check it with the test lung. In the meantime, connect the patient to the embo bag or the vein circuit. And in case of any problem, call OT technicians and seniors to help you out. Okay. So remember, while troubleshooting problems, identify the problems. How will you identify? By both observing the patient and the ventilator, ventilatory waveform parameters as well as alarms. Identify the cause. Don't hesitate in calling seniors and technicians. And in case of any doubt, you may disconnect the ventilator and check it with artificial lung, or you may connect the patient to EMBO to manually assess the resistance. So after troubleshooting the common problems, we'll move on to patient ventilator asynchrony. Asynchrony is simply the mismatch between the patient's respiratory drive and the ventilatory response. As we said, that the patient triggers the breath, then he takes inspiration, and then he expires the breath. So if the patient wants to trigger the breath, but there's some mismatch, the ventilator is not providing him the flow during triggering, or when he's taking the flow, the ventilator is not providing him adequate flow, which is the flow asynchrony, or when he wants to expire, but the ventilator is either delaying expiration or it is prematurely letting the patient expire. So these are the three main areas where asynchrony may happen. So during triggering, during the flow, or during cycling, when there's mismatch between the patient's response and ventilator. So how prevalent it is? There have been various studies with various different definitions and criteria to study. So what we observe is around 11% to around 40%, we have prevalence of asynchrony. It is more in pressure support ventilations with around 54 to 81% and lesser in control modes of ventilation. So the most common among them is ineffective triggering in 85%. On second is double triggered breaths around 13%, and others are auto triggering and cycling asynchronies, among others. So we'll directly move on to types of asynchronies. As I said, there can be trigger, there can be flow, and there can be cycling, and there will be mismatch between either of these phases. So if there's problem during trigger, which is known as trigger asynchrony, if there's problem during flow, which is known as flow asynchrony, and it is problem during cycling, it is known as cycling asynchrony. We'll talk into this in detail now. Trigger asynchrony. So another case, a 45-year-old man, known case of COPD, was intubated in view of type 2 respiratory failure, and attending GR sees the following waveform. So what we see here is that the patient inspires and then he expires. Then he inspires again and then he expires. So as I said, flow towards the patient from the ventilator is a positive deflection, and flow from the patient to the ventilator is expiration. So during expiration, what we can see, there's a positive deflection, that the air is moving, trying to move from ventilator to the patient. Simultaneously, there's a drop in the pressure, that the patient wants to inspire air. So this is what is a ineffective trigger, that the patient wants to trigger a breath here, which is manifested in this wave, but the ventilator is not giving a breath. So this is a missed trigger or an ineffective trigger when the patient wants to trigger, but the ventilator is not giving a breath. So by definition, ineffective effort is an effort which doesn't result in an assisted breath from the ventilator. It is characterized by dip in the airway pressure, as we saw, and a simultaneous decrease in the expiratory flow. Decrease in the expiratory flow because this is plus 70 to minus 70. So this is, for example, minus 30, and this is, for example, minus 10 or minus 0. So magnitude of flow is decreased. This is the most common asynchrony, and it can occur both during expiration and inspiration with a positive deflection in the flow scalar and with negative deflection in the pressure scalar. Important thing here is this scalar, which is known as esophageal pressure. Esophageal pressure scalar is usually measured by a nasogastric tube, which measures intraesophageal pressure. It reflects the intrapleural pressure, and a negative intrapleural pressure signifies a patient's trigger that he wants to take breath. So esophageal pressures will be very important later on. A negative dip means the patient wants to trigger breath. So every time you see, there's a corresponding dip in the esophageal pressure scalar as well. Now, as we saw here, there was a dip in the flow and dip in the pressure scalar. So what are the causes? One obvious cause may be trigger intensity. We have set a trigger of too high. So we have to reduce the trigger pressure and change it to flow triggering. Another thing is when there is muscle weakness or a neural weakness, which is not able to let the patient trigger to that extent, reach the trigger threshold. So muscle weakness, for example, we have got muscle relaxants, the patient is on muscle relaxants, or the patient is very weak and frail. Another thing is when he's sedated, so the neural drive is less, he's not able to reach the threshold. So we have to optimize electrolytes and optimize support in such a case. Another important thing is auto PEEP or intrinsic PEEP. What is auto PEEP? Auto PEEP, as the name implies, is the automatic positive pressure which occurs at the end of expiration in the alveoli. It occurs due to air trapping. What is air trapping is when the air moving inside the alveoli is higher, then it can expire out. So whenever the patient has very high minute ventilation, so he's taking in air, but he's not able to expire it out. So with every breath, a small amount of air is being trapped inside the alveoli, which is contributing to a positive pressure inside the alveoli. It may occur in two cases. One, when there's airway obstruction and collapse of airways during expiration. Second, when there's no collapse, but the the minute ventilation is very high. For example, when the patient is having fever, pain, anxiety, he's taking very high, very fast respiratory rate. So in that case, auto PEEP may happen. So what is the consequence? Auto PEEP, what happens is in a normal patient, for example, we have set a PEEP of 0 and we have set a pressure sensitivity of -2. Means If the intra-alveolar pressure is -2, the ventilator will sense that the patient wants to trigger a breath and it will deliver a breath. Okay. So in a normal patient, he has to generate an inspiratory effort of -2. So the intra-pleural pressure of -2 and -2 intra-alveolar pressure will create, and the patient ventilator will deliver a breath. But in case we have a PEEP 0, but in a auto PEEP of 10. So we have got a auto PEEP of 10, means a PEEP of 10 in this case. So to reset sensitivity of -2, the patient has to first take 10 centimeter of water in to bring it down the intra-alveolar pressure to 0, and they then take further -2, which is the total of 12, to bring the intra-alveolar pressure to -2 to trigger the breath. So you see now more effort is required to trigger the breath. So this is what leads to ineffective triggering. Auto PEEP, the major consequence is ineffective triggering, that the patient won't be able to trigger a breath because a larger amount of effort is required to trigger a breath. So how do we assess it? By what is known as end expiratory hold. So we have got expiration, expiration. In expiration, we'll press end expiratory hold and we see that the pressure has risen. So we have set a PEEP of 5, but we see that a total PEEP of 9 is being given. So auto PEEP of 4 is being added. So this is only possible if the patient is sedated, so that you can actually do an end expiratory hold. But this is how we determine auto PEEP. Second thing is, as we'll see later, when the expiratory flow doesn't touch. When the expiratory flow, this is the flow scalar, when the flow scalar doesn't touch the baseline, and inspiration starts before it can touch the flow. This is also suggestive of dynamic hyperinflation, which will further lead to auto PEEP. So these two things, practically expiratory flow not touching the baseline, and in case the patient is sedated, and expiratory hold. So how do we manage? First, patient factors. The patient is having a high minute volume. Reduce the pain, fever, anxiety, and at last sedate the patient. Second, when there's flow resistance, another cause. So do suction, do bronchodilation, and during intubation, use a wide bore endotracheal tube. And then at last, not at last, you may simultaneously optimize the ventilatory settings. Since the patient is not able to expire, increase the expiratory time and decrease the inspiratory time. So you allow adequate expiratory time. You decrease the minute for ventilation yourself in a sedated patient by decreasing the tidal volume or respiratory rate. And to overcome the problem of missed triggers, that is ineffective triggers, you apply an extrinsic PEEP. So what will extrinsic PEEP do? If we apply an extrinsic PEEP of around 75 to 80% of the PEEP, for example, 8, then to reach a relative of -2, the patient has to bring down intra-alveolar pressure to 6. Okay. So from an auto PEEP of 10 to auto PEEP of 6, he'll require only 4 centimeter efforts compared to 12. So applying an extrinsic PEEP decreases the patient's inflationary efforts to trigger the threshold. Okay. Now coming on to the next case. Next case is a 30-year-old gentleman, no case of CKD 5D, intubated in view of threatened airway. And then the following waveform appears. So here what we can see is the patient is inspiring, he is expiring, he is inspiring, he is expiring. But before he can complete expiration, another inspiration has occurred. So an inspiration has occurred before time. This is what is known as double triggering. Double triggering is the occurrence of 2 consecutive breaths in an interval less than half mean inspiratory time. Inspiratory time calculated over 30 cycles is what is known as mean inspiratory time, the mean of the inspiratory time, and occurrence of 2 consecutive breaths in a close succession is double triggering. 3 important reasons. 1, when the ventilatory drive of the patient is very high. For example, case of meningitis, fever, pain, anxiety, metabolic acidosis. When the delivered ventilatory support is insufficient. For example, you are giving a low tidal volume or a low flow. And third, when there is premature cycling, that is the neural, the patient wants to take breath for a longer time, but the ventilator is premature cycling it. So the same so when the ventilatory requirement is high, when the ventilatory support is less, or when there's premature cycling. 3 important causes of double trigger. So here again in this case we can see that 2 consecutive breaths have occurred in close succession. Another thing I want you to observe is this esophageal scalar. So whenever the patient triggers a breath, there's a negative dip. In this case, this dip has prolonged, due to which one cycle ended, but the same inspiratory effort is occurring, so the next cycle occurred. This is what is when the ventilatory requirements are high, premature cycling in this case. So not premature cycling per se. So management will be dependent on the cause. If the patient is high demand, you correct the underlying cause like fever, pain, acidosis. In case you're not able to correct it, you may consider sedation in the short term. Then if there is hypoxia or inadequate flow tidal volume, increase the FiO2 or increase the flow. And in case you have short TI, increase the inspiratory time. Now coming on to auto-triggering. Auto-triggering is when triggering occurs due to non-respiratory stimuli. Non-respiratory stimuli in absence of patient's effort. It may occur when the trigger threshold is too sensitive, that other minor perturbations in the circuit may induce a breath, or when there's circuit leak or water in the circuit, or when there's vigorous cardiac oscillations with themselves inducing it. So we can see that we have got a pressure scalar, we have got a flow scalar, we have got the esophageal pressure scalar, and during inspiration, then expiration, we have got these sinusoidal perturbations due to cardiac oscillations. And one of these cardiac oscillations triggers a breath. So the management is dependent on cause. For cardiac oscillations, you may increase the trigger threshold or change to pressure triggering from flow triggering. For water in the circuit, use water traps and use HME instead of heated humidifier. For secretions and circuit leaks, do suctioning and eliminate the leaks. And for if the trigger sensitivity is very high, increase the trigger threshold so that you may reduce its sensitivity. Coming on to delayed triggering is when the patient wants to trigger a breath, but the assistance provided by ventilator occurs after a particular time gap. So there's a delay of ventilatory assistance. It may occur when the trigger threshold is set very high. For example, you have set the threshold of -5. Patient starts taking breath, he goes from 0 to -1, then -2, then -3, then -4, then -5. When he reaches -5, then the patient is assisting. So that leads to delayed trigger. So in that case, you have to lower down the trigger threshold. Another thing is, in the earlier when the microprocessors were slow, this used to occur, but not as relatively less frequent problem. Another thing which was defined recently in 2013 was reverse triggering on entrainment. Reverse triggering is when the ventilator triggers a patient's breath. So usually the patient triggers the breath or the ventilator triggers the breath. In heavily sedated or brain dead patients, what happens is ventilator triggers a breath, and this triggering of breath leads to stimulation of the patient's inspiratory efforts, which leads to patient triggering the breath again towards the end of the inspiration. As you can see, in this case, this is a flow, pressure, volume, and esophageal pressure scalar. At this point, the ventilator triggers a breath. There's no negative dip in the pressure scalar. This is a ventilator triggered breath. And you can see after a particular amount of time, the esophageal pressure is negative. Now the patient is triggering the breath. So this is reverse triggering, ventilator inducing the patient to trigger the breath. And this leads to flow perturbations in towards the end of inspiration. And sometimes it leads to generation of another breath, which leads to breath stacking. So it may be commonly identified when there is flow asynchrony towards the end of inspiration with another breath occurring. Now coming on to flow asynchronies. Flow asynchronies is when the patient's flow demand is not met by the ventilator. For example, in this case of a VCV mode, we have got pressure, volume, and flow scalars. So the patient inspires and then expires. So green is the inspiration. So when he inspires, during the inspiratory curve should be like this, but we see that there's a dip in the inspiratory curve. This is what is flow asynchrony. So just I will talk about this later also. So we can identify it by the pressure scalar as well as the flow volume scalar. So when there's a dip occurring during inspiration, this is a success of flow asynchrony. And you see, we had set a tidal volume 368, inspiratory time of 80.8 seconds, with a peak flow of 54. What we did in this patient was, we decreased the TI from 0.8 to 0.6, achieving a flow increase to 72. And you can see that the pressure scalar is now better. So simple small things may actually increase the patient ventilator synchrony. So the treatment is you have to increase the flow rate. You may do so by decreasing the inspiratory time or by introducing inspiratory pause so that the flow occurs during the rest of the inspiratory time, or by increasing tidal volume if the lung mechanics allow. Coming on to the last, cycling asynchronous. Cycling asynchronous may be when there's prolonged cycle or a premature cycle or a false cycle. Prolonged cycle is when the ventilatory TI is more than unit TI. That is the patient wants to stop the breath and start expiration, but the ventilator is not allowing him. Ventilator is prolonging the cycle. Okay? Premature cycle is when the ventilator prematurely cycles into expiration, but the patient still wants to continue inspiration. And then we have false cycling, we'll see later. So delayed cycling. You can see this is pressure scalar, flow scalar, and the volume scalar. So this is inspiration, the flow scalar. Then the patient this inspiration is happening. This time there's no flow. Okay. Similarly, in the pressure scaler, we see that at the start of inspiration, there's a dip, signifying it is a spontaneous breath, patient triggered breath. Then at this time, there's increase in the pressure. Why is this occurring? These dog ear formation is occurring because patient want to expire, but the exhalation valve is not yet open. So the patient is not able to achieve the flow. He has stopped inspiration, but he is not able to expire. So at this point, tidal volume, there's no change. Flow is not there. He's neither able to inspire nor expire. He's not able to inspire better because he doesn't want to inspire, but he is not able to expire. At this right line, exhalation valve opens, and you see a sudden dip and expiration. And here the pressures return to normal. So this is the neural. The red line represents the neural inspiratory time, and the white line represents the ventilatory time. Why is it so? Because we know this is a pressure control mode. Cycling is time cycled. So only after a particular time it will cycle. So this is leading to delayed cycling. So typically occurs in COPD patients. We can also see that the expiratory flow is not reaching the baseline. There's dynamic hyperinflation. So management in PCV mode, of course, you decrease the inspiratory time. You may also decrease the rise time. Rise time is the time it takes from pressure to reach to the peak in pressure control. So if you decrease the rise time, the inspiration may occur earlier. In PSP mode, you may increase the pressure support. You may expiratory cycle at a higher threshold. As I said, instead of 25%, if you cycle at 40%, the cycling will occur earlier. So delayed cycling will be taken care of. Coming on to premature cycling. Premature cycling is when the patient wants to inspire, but the ventilator prematurely terminates it. So in this case, what you see is patient is inspiring, he is expiring, but at the start of the expiration only in this flow scalar, we see a positive dip. While the patient is triggering, patient wants the flow to come towards him away from the ventilator. So this occurs because during this same breath, the patient wanted to inspire at this point of time only, but the ventilator premature cycled him. Okay. We have to contrast this to mixed trigger. Mixed trigger is when he inspired, expired, after he has completed a substantial amount of expiration and he wants to take a new breath. So new breath taking is triggering and he is not able to trigger. So it is mixed trigger, but it is occurring very early in the expiration. It is a premature cycling. Okay. So management is in PCV mode, we increase the inspiratory time, we increase the rise time. In PSP mode, we cycle at a lower flow rate, and VCV mode, we increase the tidal volume. False cycling. We saw in that case when the high pressures were rising, this false cycling is the premature termination due to pressure overshooting alarm. So to save the lungs from higher pressure, it prematurely cycles. So patient factors, as we saw, increased PPEEK may be a lot of conditions. Sometimes ventilatory factors when there's inappropriate alarms. So if you treat these two things, false cycling will not happen. Now, special considerations in NIV is the air leak, optimize the interface fit. For patient anxiety and discomfort, reassure the patient intermittently. Okay, and don't forget to set inspiratory and expiratory sensitive both. So summarizing, know the patient status first. Okay, don't just jump onto sedating the patient. Know the patients first, evaluate and correct the reversible causes, then judiciously adjust the ventilator settings before opting for your finishing move. So these guidelines for sedation, you may target short intervals of moderate sedation after you have optimized these things. In a patient of ARDS, paralytics may be given in the initial 48 hours in earlier phase of ARDS, and in status systematicus when the benefit outweighs risk in life-threatening hypoxemia and dynamic hyperinflation. So newer modes, these are some proportional modes which have been made to optimize patient ventilator asynchrony. These include NAVA. So NAVA is a newer technology in which from CNS we saw that there was a whole train, and when there was change in pressure synchrony, change in pressure, it was triggering. But in this case, at the level of diaphragmatic excitation, it is able to detect and trigger a breath. So there's a decreased latency of triggering, as well as it delivers in proportion to the patient approach. Similarly, there's PAVA, proportional assist ventilation. This is not available currently in our department, so I'll not talk about this. And I'll like to hand over mic to Sajay sir to increase our understanding about loops. So thank you, Ayush, for that presentation. Now I'm just going to talk about loops. The two important loops, the two loops that we have during mechanical ventilation of the pressure volume and the flow volume loops. So first I'll just come to the pressure volume loop. Pressure volume loop is where the pressure is charted on the x-axis and the volume is charted on the y-axis.
So during experimental conditions, when there is no flow, you have what is called as a static PV loop. But in mechanical ventilation, what we can see is the compliance of the lung. But when there is additional flow, like in a ventilated patient, we have the airway resistance coming in, and that also adds to the pressure in the PV loop. So if we can see this part, we can see that the dotted line is the static PV loop. And if we add the airway pressure in the patient, we can see that the loop shifts to the right. This is because of the trans airway pressure. Add the ventilator circuit to that, and then the limb further shifts to the right. This PV loop also, the width of the PV loop also depends upon the resistance provided by the tube. So the smaller the tube you use, more the resistance and more is the pressure generated. So the PV loop widens. It's important to know all of this because you need to know what the normal things that can affect the PV loop so you can see when it is abnormal. Coming to the anatomy of the PV loop, we have the pressure on the x-axis and then the volume on the y-axis. We have the PEEP that is set beyond which the PV loop starts. We have the inspiratory limb, which is typically on the bottom, and the expiratory limb is on the top. During the inspiration, you can see that the alveoli slowly start getting recruited. Once most of the alveoli are recruited, it follows almost a linear curve. And once you start reaching that point where there is over distension of alveoli, you can see that there's a lot more pressure required to just inflate the alveoli by a little. And then coming back down, you have the expiratory limb where the alveoli are continuously de-recruited. And here you can see that there's an upper inflection point where most of the over-distended alveoli come back to normal, and then again it follows a linear relationship. If you take the point from the inspiration, from the start of inspiration to the end of inspiration, you can calculate the compliance of the lung. And at this tip, you can see that you can, dropping it on the x-axis, you get the peak inspiratory pressure, and dropping it on the y-axis, you get the tidal volume. So the PV loop that you get is called as the global PV loop. Most of the alveoli are heterogeneous. So especially in ARDS, you have some which are filled with fluid and some which are filled with air. As you can see that when the linear relationship begins, there are those alveoli filled with fluid that are still not yet open. And by the time you reach that point where you have over distension, you have these normal alveoli which are already there. So it is best to ventilate the lung between the lower and the upper inflection point to make sure that most of the alveoli are within the necessary compliance. So the PV loop changes based on the type of breath. You have a spontaneous breath where the PV loop is almost vertical. This follows the negative pressure physiology that Ayush was talking about. If you add a CPAP to this loop is going to shift to the right. If you add a CPAP of 5, the loop is going to come on this point of 5. In a mandatory breath, the PV loop takes a shape of an inclined loop with the inspiration going upwards and the expiration going downwards. In an assisted breath, we have inspiration, the patient inspires, drawing in a negative breath, and then the ventilator assists, which pushes the PV loop towards the right. So the PEEP and flow also have an important point in the PV loop. You can see that the curve A does not have any PEEP and curve B has a PEEP. If you provide an optimal PEEP, where most of the alveoli are slightly distended, it brings the lung. What? I think the meeting. I think it's happening. Fine. Anyway. Hello. That's the effect of PEEP. And as we said, if you increase the flow, you're going to increase the airway resistance that is visualized, and the will again widen. PV loop also changes based on the mode of ventilation. VCV is what we've been talking about, and you can calculate the compliance only in VCV with a constant flow. Otherwise, in PCV, it takes on a more of a box-shaped character because the volume is not allowed to increase in PCV. Coming to changes in lung pathology, if you have lung compliance that is changing, that is, if you have the lung compliance that is decreasing, it starts falling down the PV loop. And if you have the lung compliance, lung compliance is decreasing, it starts falling down, and lung compliance is increasing, it starts moving more towards the y-axis. As you can see in PV loop, with decreasing lung compliance and similar ventilative parameters, you have peaking that shows over distension. But in PV loop, but in PCV, the compliance reduces, but there is no peaking because there's no increase in volume. So we're compromising on the volume of the patient. So if you have an increase in airway resistance, like we said, the curve is going to widen. Like in bronchospasm, you treat them with bronchodilators, it's going to come back to normal again. You can also check some asynchronies, like in this. This is the normal PV loop in an assisted breath, but in this case, you can see that the work done by the patient is higher to trigger the ventilatory breath, probably the trigger is set too high, so we might need to reduce the trigger in this case. So this is called as fish scaling. In case of flow, you can see that during inspiration, there's a caving in of the inspiratory loop, and here somewhere during the end of inspiration, and this is because the patient is taking in some breath, and that is happening because of flow asynchrony, which Ayush already spoke about. If you have auto PEEP, you can see that the PV loop lifts up from the x-axis because of dynamic hyperinflation, and the work done because of auto PEEP is also going to be higher, as depicted by this extra rectangular area. You can also check for a leak. The leak happens when the PV loop does not touch zero on the y-axis. This is the amount of volume that has leaked out of the circuit. Coming to the flow volume loop is similarly interpreted as you would in a spirometry, but the thing is, in this case, the expiration is a passive process, but in spirometry, you ask them to forcefully expire into the limb. You can check the peak inspiratory flow, peak expiratory flow, and the tidal volume in the PV, SV loop. But by convention, inspiration is on top and expiration is at the bottom, but this can change based on the ventilators. The flow volume loop will follow the kind of curve of the flow curve. So if you have the flow curve which is constant, you're going to have the inspiration that is cut off. And if you have a flow curve that is decelerating like in a PCV, you're going to have a flow curve that is again kind of dome shaped like we see here. Spirometry, we can see the scooped out appearance in the expiratory flow, and with bronchodilators, the scooped out appearance disappears and the peak expiratory flow increases as well. With the leak, we can see that the expiratory limb does not reach zero on the volume axis, and this is the amount of volume that has leaked out. Contrasting to a leak, we have dynamic hyperinflation where the PV loop touches the y-axis. Y-axis without reaching zero. That means there is still some flow which has not come back to zero, suggestive of dynamic hyperinflation, where you would like to check for auto PEEP. So this is some squiggly irregularity that you can see in the FV loop, and this commonly occurs when there is secretions in the tubing, and suctioning would help with this. So take-home messages: we have to treat the patient, not the waveform. We have to assess the patient and the ventilator in harmony. Keep in mind the alarm limits and the sensitivity. Assess both the parameters and the waveforms, the scalars and the loops. And asynchrony is a sign of life. If you have a patient who is not sedated, but there is no asynchrony, you might want to check if the patient is still alive. So thank you. Now I'd like to call Animesh sir for some comments.
Yeah, so thank you, Sujay, and thank you, Ayush, for the seminar. I mean, these people have been at it for a long time, and I think they've done a fairly good job. So I'm sorry we overshot the time a little bit. So I think we should be moving directly to questions if there are any. Just one point which I would like to make is that learning about graphs is learning on the job kind of a thing. You cannot do the theory first and then you cannot expect that you go to the ward or to the ICU and know everything about that. So it is a gradual process. For anybody, it starts usually with the numbers. So the number of the absolute value of peak pressure, plateau pressure, and the leak, the difference between the inspiratory and the expiratory tidal volume. I think we should start with that. Then we should move on to the scalars, pressure flow scalar. They are very informative. And last should be this loop, because these loops are a little complicated. But I think if we do that, and if we are trying to understand what is happening to the patient, whenever the patient is in discomfort, trying to understand, correlate what is happening in the ventilator waveform and to the patient, I think we would be able to understand most of what happens in a ward in our ICU. So I would I would request the house or the people who are attending through the online mode to field any questions if there are any. We'll be more than happy to answer.